In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of man can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense. In 2015, it still is Common Sense.
I'm Alyson Perry.
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. With less than 2 weeks to go before the start of the next legislative session and a special election to fill the Senate seat in District 11, things are heating up this late December. Representative Patricia Morgan will have an in-depth interview. Closing out the broadcast, as always, commentator Jeff Richard will bring us his unique perspective on how we live and work in the Ocean State. During the breaks between segments, Alyson and I will return briefly to ask, and maybe even answer, our favorite question: are you kidding me? First, though, the show kicks off with analysis of some of the top stories impacting our state and our nation. Alyson.
Thanks, Mark. The administration of Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo is obsessed with revenue. All the plans they have for what government can do depend on funding. So it was more than a little awkward a week or so ago when the administration's tax administrator, David Sullivan, was forced to admit that a revenue stream estimated at between $2 million and $3 million for the first quarter of the fiscal year had actually only yielded a little more than $60,000. The source of this revenue was the newly imposed sales tax on room rentals in small inns and private homes. It's called the Airbnb tax, after the popular smartphone app that pairs travelers with locals who have extra rooms to let. When the tax was passed at the end of the last season, there were wails and moans heard from the small business community, based on the additional paperwork which would now be necessary. Rhode Island's chief tax agent, Neil Downing, was interviewed on the shortfall by the Brown Daily Herald. It was reported that Mr. Downing bravely suggested that there was a learning curve and that as small bed and breakfast establishments got used to the new requirements, the revenue stream would ramp up. He even went so far as to suggest that the annual estimate of income for the fiscal year, $7.1 million, should still be met. Mr. Downing, like many of his colleagues in the present administration, seemed to be living in a dream world. In that fantasy land, it must be plain to all residents that because they need that kind of money from this new and onerous tax, that money will be forthcoming. Like you, though, I live in Rhode Island, and here in the Ocean State, there is no way that that annual estimate comes close to being accurate. Folks trying to make a couple bucks off a spare bedroom will either forget about renting it out, be unaware of their tax liability, or ignore the levy altogether. The bigger problem for the governor is that this is just one of the number of ways too rosy estimates, which are also bound to fail the sanity test of life in the real world. Do any of our viewers actually believe that truck tolls will bring in 60 to 75 million once they get in? So what's the end game going to be? Will the governor trim her sails and reduce program spending to accommodate the reality that it can't be paid for? None of our viewers believe that either. Fasten your seatbelts, folks. It's going to be a rough ride. Mark?
Thanks, Alyson. It seems that a number of city officials also live with their state counterparts in that same dream world. Last week, I highlighted the dire warnings made by financier Mike Riley on the precarious state of the pension fund of the city of Providence. This week, in a coincidence which should surprise no one, investors' rating service Moody's announced it was cutting the capital city's financial outlook rating to a negative value. That's way below junk bond status, ladies and gentlemen. That's joke bond status, as in, the joke's on you if you're dumb enough to buy one. Despite the easy laugh line, this is a serious problem for the Elorza administration. As reported by Channel 12 News, Moody's announcement followed the revelation that the city had closed out the last fiscal year $5 million in the red. The rating service, in an attempt to explain why it was essentially condemning the city to financial death, cited several very negative factors. Moody's highlighted the perennial habit of city managers of using one-time revenue sources to balance current budgets rather than saving those windfalls for future liabilities. Added to that were consistently lower than forecast property tax revenues and a current liability for the pension payments alone of over $2 billion. And that was set against a backdrop of what Moody's would only refer to as very weak cash reserves in each of the city's funds. The city's credit rating has suffered since the beginning of the Tavares administration, when it went public with the opinion that it had inherited, quote, a Category 5 financial hurricane, unquote, when it took office in 2011. Now the city has run a deficit 5 of its last 7 annual budgets, despite the state law requiring municipalities to always balance their budgets. So this recent action by Moody's should be a wake-up call. Mayor Elorza will probably try to ignore it because taking proper fiscal action at this point would bring unbearable political pain and suffering. It is a wake-up call the investors community will surely heed, though, so the inevitable political meltdown will now hit us all the sooner. And make no mistake, folks, the bankruptcy of our capital city will hit us all. Every taxpayer in Rhode Island will be needed if there is any hope of quickly fixing the years of financial neglect that have become the standard in Providence. Allison?
Thanks, Mark. Last November, we got the results of the first nationwide test of primary school students called Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, or PARC. The numbers for the Ocean State were not good. Students in our public schools, on average, only met standards for their grades in English 33% of the time, while in math, our kids only hit grade level 25% of the time. Ouch. The real story here, though, is what has happened in the 4 or 5 weeks since those results were announced. To her credit, the governor reckoned that the results were a moment of truth. "We've got to get it right," she said. The response by our new commissioner of education was far more curious. Ken Wagner asserted that these poor results were the fault of neither the students nor the teachers. "Okay, Dr. Wagner, if you say so, but who does that leave?" Well, let me tell you. The excuses and justifications immediately started gushing from the educational community. The most common suggestion? Students aren't used to answering on a computer. Really? The computer games generation can't handle a keyboard? It was then claimed that the students were not prepared and ready to take the test. Really? In the 5 years since the standardized effort was announced, and with all the howling we've heard about teaching to the test, are you telling me that this was a surprise? In her December editorial on the subject in the Valley Breeze, Uber Rhode Islander Arlene Violet said she'd be willing to accept the low score in writing and arithmetic if they were accompanied by leading results in critical thinking, problem solving, and clear writing. But that didn't even begin to happen. Miss Violet took that fact as her opportunity to point out that this country is losing the mantle of academic leadership in the world. What's flunking here is our entire educational system, folks. So you can now expect sanctimonious calls from the teachers' unions for smaller classroom sizes and more specialized instructors. Stop, will ya? This state already is in the top 5 nationally when it comes to public spending on education. And what do we get for it? Dismal graduation rates and students almost completely unprepared for either college or the high-tech workplace. We need to rethink all of our curricula to bring them into line with 21st century academic and commercial needs. We need to dramatically adjust our too short and disjointed academic calendar to give students the time they really need to absorb and internalize these new lessons. Or, as Miss Violet put it in the Valley Breeze, it's about time that school bus companies stop dictating educational policy on the length of the school day. One other thing we should do is pressure our governor to do what she said and get it right. Mark?
Thank you for that, Allison. Lest we give the impression that all of the news is somber and bleak, let's demonstrate that some of it can be laugh-out-loud ridiculous. So before we move on to Representative Patricia Morgan's first segment, one of us will be right back to ask the satirical question, are you kidding me?
As we are making merry this holiday season, it might be sobering to reflect on the lengths some Rhode Islanders are going to get high for the holidays. How does blowing up yourself in your kitchen sound in pursuit of a bit of a buzz? Are you kidding me? According to State Fire Marshal John Cartier, that's exactly what's happening. Amateur chemists all over the Ocean State are trying to turbocharge the effects of marijuana by concentrating its active ingredient. The process usually uses a solvent to extract the THC and a butane torch to heat the mixture to boil it down. Unfortunately, the flammable combination of solvents and open flames can make for an explosive finish to the evening before the party even gets started. The Channel 10 I-Team recently reported on a condo explosion in Westerly that brought the Drug Enforcement Administration to the scene to assess the aftermath. Not only was the apartment blown out, but the vinyl siding outside the windows was melted by the brief but very high-temperature blast. Fans of the hit TV show Breaking Bad may think this ineptitude to be beneath the standards set by Walter White. Fans' continued breathing and the absence of third-degree burns, on the other hand, would do well to stick to more traditional stimulants this season, like spiked eggnog and mistletoe. We're not telling you this for your own good so much as for ours. We have few enough fans as it is, and we need to keep all of our viewers healthy and ready to tune into future shows. Are you kidding me?
Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is the program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and today we have with us John Pagliarini, who is the Republican candidate for the Senate District 11, which is over in the East Bay. It's Providence, Portsmouth, Tiverton, and Bristol. And I want to tell our viewers that John is the Republican candidate. We actually have invited the Democrat opponent to come, and we just haven't heard from him yet, but we will try to get him on so you can get to know him as well. John, welcome.
Thank you.
There are a lot of issues facing Rhode Island right now. The state, to me, they say it's going in the right direction, but a lot of our folks out there just don't feel it. What do you think are the biggest challenges that the state of Rhode Island is facing right now?
I think there's two that are very important. Number one is the economy, and number two is government itself. And I'll start with the last. Number one, government needs to get out of its own way. There's so many burdensome regulations that affect the economy.
Yes, they do.
As an attorney, I am involved with many commercial industrial clients, and the regulations are just prohibitive in so many different ways. But additionally, the average resident of Rhode Island, there's a level of mistrust against state government. There's a desire for more transparency, and it's basically a public relations issue with government.
Well, I think you're right about the transparency issue. That's come up really in our face this summer. A lot of watchdog groups actually had to go to the governor and say, we're not getting the information. I'm a legislator, and hopefully you will be too. Normally you should be able, as a legislator, to call a department, an agency, and say, I need this information, please send it. And they are making us put in APRA requests to get it. And APRA is an Access to Public Records Act request. That's pretty much unheard of. But under this administration, they just don't want to give that information, and that is a problem. And yet, we learned recently that they hired all of these communications folks.
Right.
Why do you think that is a big problem? Why should the people be concerned that their government isn't giving them knowledge?
Well, I mean, knowledge is power, and the power really does lie with the voters and the residents of the state. And we want to know that we're being asked to spend $1 billion here, a couple of $100 million here. Well, we don't do that at our kitchen table without knowing all the facts when we make decisions of a much smaller level. So why are we just giving carte blanche and a blank check to the governor and to state government?
Yeah, and it's not about having spin doctors, that's communications folks. It's really about just giving the information and letting people look at it themselves and find out what the real story is.
I agree with that.
You mentioned also that you thought our economy needed some work.
Oh, without question. It's easy to say things are better. Well, they were better from something that was really bad in 2008, but it's not well yet. And we need to continue to make it better. And when you look at all the oppressive regulations and taxes and fees against small business in particular, we're not better.
We had Gary Sass on a few weeks ago, and he has had the data point that the annual family income for Rhode Islanders has actually decreased by 12% since 2008. Not a good trend for families.
No, and that goes to the types of jobs that we're not bringing into the state. We need better paying jobs, but you just can't say, I want jobs that pay more. Do we have the skills to get those jobs? And it's a whole cohesive plan that we need to be working on, and it doesn't seem to be resonating at the State House.
Yeah, and that's why we need more Republicans up there. my editorial comment. One of the things that you will be dealing with when you are a senator is the budget. So that drives a lot of decisions and policy in Rhode Island. It's our most important document that we put out. What do you see as maybe your priorities there? What would you do around that?
Well, I think, number one, I'm built for the Finance Committee. As an attorney, I am very versed in reading code, and I love math, which is a very odd combination. But I can look at a more cohesive picture and see what piece is connected to what piece, and I really feel is that that's a strength that's lacking in many of our Senate leaders right now. Everybody's worried about their one little piece of something, and I'll give you, for instance, a town like Portsmouth, where they want to do tax stabilization agreements to entice business to come in, and there's definitely a need for it because geographically. But when you open that door to Portsmouth, you open that door to the city of Providence, and their numbers are much greater. And what we end up doing in Portsmouth is sending our money to Providence. So while it initially seems like it's a great idea for Portsmouth, I want to be able to look at the whole picture and say, you know what? If we didn't have those local incentives, Providence couldn't have those local incentives. And maybe if the whole state didn't have them, we might be able to attract business in a different method of doing it. I would look to like the city of Warwick. They don't offer tax incentives to anybody,
No.
and yet they're probably one of our better examples of economic development. You look at the city of Providence, who gives economic development incentives to folks, and yet the rest of the state ends up subsidizing the city.
Yeah, you know, I've said for a long time we shouldn't have to pay companies to come here, and a tax stabilization agreement means you're giving them a tax break. You're actually paying them to come. They should want to come because we do everything right. Low regulations, low taxes, a good legal environment, that's what brings companies here.
And as a property tax attorney, I'm truly troubled by a town such as Portsmouth, where you have long-standing businesses like Clement's Market. It's a supermarket. They've been paying their taxes, they're good corporate citizens, and I'm going to offer a new market who wants to hypothetically locate across the street tax incentives to come into the town and do that. I'm troubled by that. I don't think it's fair. I would rather that we lower the state corporate tax rate and everybody shares in the benefit, including the existing businesses, and not just give incentives to new businesses.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very good way to look at it. If we lower the burdens on all businesses, they can all thrive because all of them provide jobs. The ones that have been here, the ones that we want to entice.
And I'm more loyal to the ones that have been here than the ones that want to come.
Well, and I you know, it is something that we drive from the state level, though, and a lot of folks don't understand that so many of the decisions we make at the General Assembly put mandates on businesses at the local level.
Sure.
So something you can really impact.
Yeah.
Good. And we're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back.
Is there trouble in paradise? Are mommy and daddy fighting in public up on Smith Hill? Were all the recent tableaus of political concord between the new speaker and the new governor just pretext that's now dropping away? Best of all, might this emerging tug-of-war result in some real benefits for the long-suffering, hard-working, tax-paying men and women of Rhode Island? Are you kidding me? In advance of the start of the new legislative session in January, Speaker Nicholas Mattiello has just made a public call for the governor to release the locations of the truck tolling gantries she plans to use to generate revenue to pay for the big bond. According to Kathy Gregg, writing in the Providence Journal, the governor is sticking to her guns for now. Gregg reports that Raimondo's spokeswoman, Marie Aberger, answered the Mattiello demand by restating the administration's position that they have to have enabling legislation in place before opening negotiations with the Federal Highway Administration on the actual locations. Executive Director of the Rhode Island Trucking Association, Chris Maxwell, has suggested that the governor's plan must contain proposed locations with traffic counts, or it couldn't have accurately estimated the $60 million in new revenue needed to pay for the bond. Speaker Mattiello clearly telegraphed that he wants the House Finance Committee to have those proposed locations before the bill sees its committee vote. We may be about to find out what happens when an irresistible force is applied to an immovable object. And why might all this be happening? Do you think the social media marketing campaign for the Republican no-tolls Bridgeworks plan is getting some traction with voters? It sure looks like Democrats in the House are taking notice. So, if a protracted stalemate of the legislation in the House is the result of this internecine spat, will the state be forced to make some kind of provisions for critical infrastructure maintenance using current income? Oh my, can you say, pay as we go? The Republican moniker associated with this no-tolls plan will certainly be dropped by House leadership like a bad habit. But that's just fine if the results are immediate and do not involve picking the public's pockets for even more of their scarce dollars. We may be seeing the first step towards resolving the road maintenance issue in favor of the people and good management. Ain't democracy wonderful? Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and today we have with us John Pagliarini, who is the candidate in Senate District 11, which is on the East Bay, Portsmouth, Tiverton, and Bristol. John, the park scores recently came out from our students, right? This is a standardized test that every student has to take, and they were stunningly bad. You know, when we look at education in Rhode Island, it's just not doing its job for our young people. And in order for our young people to get great jobs and to attract businesses into Rhode Island and get our economy going, we need the really best education possible. Have you had any thoughts, conversations about education?
Sure. I have two children. Actually, this week, my daughter graduates from the University of Rhode Island.
Oh, wonderful.
So she getting
Congratulations to her.
A semester early. Yay. And my son is in the 10th grade at Tiverton High School. And so we're in it. I mean, we're parents, and all parents, we want the best for our children from an education perspective. And are we getting that right now? If you just look abstractly at the park scores, the answer is no, we're not. But when I look at my district, they're committed to good education. On one side, a few of the communities need help with capital improvements, and they'll be going out for referendum and try to put more money in the capital budget to give the children a better learning environment. You know, it's tough for the children, too, when it's cold in the school in the winter and hot in the summertime.
Sure.
And those are capital issues, but we need to give the children a good place to learn. But when I look at the town of Portsmouth, I mean, it's a town that is truly committed to education and breaking into that tier one and be the best of the best. And when you go to the school meetings, you hear them saying, we want to be up there with Barrington and East Greenwich, and they're almost there. And it's a very proud, school spirit is proud.
So they've developed a culture
without
of
question,
excellent education.
As I'm talking to residents, and we go around and we talk to people in Portsmouth, there's a culture, and it's all about the children. And if we took that culture and spread it beyond District 11 and went statewide,
We need to.
it really emboldens what we're about, and that's the future of our children. We all want our children to have more and be better than what we have and the opportunities that we had. And it segues into the economy, and, you know, do we need welders? Not every child belongs in the traditional school
vocational
system.
training, sure.
We need to put more into vocational and different alternatives. And that's not to drain the public system. It's to enhance the child's opportunities, because not everybody can be book smart. There are children who are gifted with their hands.
I have one of those.
And, you know, I have a a 10th grader who is off the charts on computers, and he doesn't like to read his English book. But ask him to do anything on a computer or a cell phone or anything, and it's amazing. So how do we embrace those children? That's part of the problem, is we need to figure that out.
Yeah, and I was a teacher. You probably don't know that, but I honestly believe that education is the way that we break the cycle of poverty, and that we get kids moving up the ladder. And we need to be the best we can in Rhode Island. I'm really happy to hear that your district has and is developing that culture of excellence, because we need it all around Rhode Island.
I mean, no matter where you go, if I'm at the town transfer station passing out palm cards, education comes up. And this is a town that takes care of their schools. And that's not to say Tiverton and Bristol don't, but the Portsmouth culture is fascinating when it comes to education. And as a parent, you got to be proud of that.
All right, and we need to get it in every school.
Yes.
All right, good. We're talking about the economy, and you know that the governor has proposed to toll all of our major highways in Rhode Island. Not just one highway, we got to toll them all. And she is saying we'll only toll trucks. I don't believe it, but that's what she's saying. I know over on the East Bay over the last few years there has been a staunch opposition to tolls on the Zaccaria River Bridge. And to their credit, the citizens over there were able to stop that from happening. When people get engaged, they stop it. But now the governor is kind of determined to put 17 to 22 toll gantries all around Rhode Island. What do you think about that, and what would you do?
Well, as I've told the residents in my district, I have two words, and that is no tolls. It's just bad, and it's it's bad business, and it's bad government. And we have a gantry that still to this day crosses the Zaccaria River Bridge, and it is a symbol of mistrust with our government, because we cross that bridge multiple times every day, and we take a look to our right, and we see the rusty old bridge that's blocking the vista of the bay and needs to come down immediately. But that gantry, just as long as it stands there, tolls can come back.
Oh, in an hour.
And that's probably the largest distinction I have with my opponent, is he's supporting the governor and everything's on the table according to him.
Well, you know that in the Senate actually did pass the tolling proposal last year. The governor brought it to the table 3 weeks before the session was over, and they immediately passed it. So all the Democrats voted for tolls. The Republicans, I'm proud to say, did not. At least 3 of them did not. I think that it would be really bad for our economy. We're actually thinking of taking $60 to $80 million a year and putting it on consumers, the trucking industry, small businesses. How do you think you can affect that?
This is the poster child for transparency in government, because those senators that voted for it last year, if they find out there's a gantry in their community, they may not be voting for it in the future.
They didn't seem to care last year.
Yeah, but they didn't know where they were going. And the question becomes, let's go on the assumption that the toll gantries go up. Now we're only supposed to toll interstate trucks. Well, as an attorney, I have a problem with that, because we're going to have to defend that position. And we're going to be brought with a lawsuit under what's called the Dormant Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution.
Yes.
And one of two things is going to happen after years and millions of dollars of litigation.
Yes.
And that's going to be, we either take the tolls down or we tax passenger cars, because you can't discriminate just against one class.
It's unfair. And quite frankly, I have talked with trucking industries, and they will bring suit. And you could have a suit from 30 different states stopping those tolls.
Sure.
All right, with that, I want to remind all of you to talk tolls over your Christmas dinner, and we'll be right back.
The governor, the Speaker of the House, and the President of the Senate are all on record as proponents of green energy. On its surface, this looks like a truth and beauty question. Are you in favor of truth and beauty? Who could answer no? But when you look into it a bit deeper, you'll see that the green energy support professed by our political hierarchy is going to cost ordinary Rhode Islanders a couple $100 extra per year, with the money going primarily to out-of-state manufacturers. Are you kidding me? Sad, but true. The legislature has mandated the use of minimum quantities of renewable energy by National Grid for the power consumption metered here in the Ocean State. The laws enacted to do this even define renewable energy as electrical power generated by either wind or solar methods. Too bad, because today, the lion's share of the electricity distributed by the public utility in Little Rhodey comes from Hydro Canada. Many might ordinarily think hydroelectric power is renewable, but it doesn't fit the narrow confines of our law. That Rhode Island law, by the way, permits National Grid to pay as much as 5 times the market rate per kilowatt hour in order to secure its brand of renewable energy. And guess how the utility recoups that 5-fold increase in cost of goods sold? They get to pass the upcharge along to ratepayers. Nobody would buy a wind generator or a solar voltaic panel if they had to compete with the very low cost of hydroelectricity. So the extra couple $100 per year the average consumer will spend under this program is essentially going to the makers of these inefficiently expensive means of production. You may be able to afford the $200 per year that the Washington Examiner cites as the nationwide average, but there are Rhode Islanders who cannot, however, and they all depend on electricity from National Grid. That brings me to 3 questions. 1. Did our political leadership even analyze the costs of their plan before implementing it? 2. Did they even care that they've imposed an unnecessary financial burden on many who cannot afford it? And my 3rd question, of course, is are you kidding me?
Welcome back to Common Sense Rhode Island. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and today we have with us John Pagliarini, who is the Senate candidate in District 11 on the East Bay, which is Portsmouth, Tiverton, and Bristol. I want to mention that we did invite your opponent, James Seveny, but we haven't heard back from him yet. But we'll try to get him on so you can learn a little bit about him. John, we were just talking about the tolls, and one of the part of the tolling proposal that the governor is pushing through is that we would borrow $500 million, billion, and pay back $1.2 billion. So half of that money would go to interest rate. But I think the most important thing for the taxpayers, besides that wasteful practice, is that it would add to our debt load. And we recently learned that Rhode Island is very high in debt on individuals here in Rhode Island, per capita debt load. Do you think we have too little, too much, just right? What do you think about our debt load in Rhode Island?
We have an awful lot of debt. If I remember correctly, it's about $12,000 per person in the state. And that's just so much money. I mean,
that includes children and the elderly as well.
Everybody. So take an average family of 4. Effectively, you're in debt, or the government's in debt on your behalf, $50,000.
Yeah, kind of like a whole year's pay. Stop eating.
So yes, we have far too much debt, and that's the sins of government past. I mean, we've got a lot of deferred maintenance.
We have had 80 years of government rule, but who am I to mention that? Go ahead.
And we just have to take a look at what our priorities are and how do we do it. And there's different ways of getting out of that debt, and we just have to figure out what's the best way.
Yeah, our budget is about $8.5 billion. That's a lot of money for a tiny state like ours. And you would think that we would be able to, as you say, prioritize with that amount of money and get the important things done. Because there's a lot of fluffy things we do out there. They're nice, but they're not really critical to people's lives.
Sure, and we have to look to efficiencies and the lean government that's advocated by VibeCo down in Richmond. And I've been through Carl's President's Day and his whole process and how he's brought that to government. And it's fascinating because there is so much red tape. There is so much duplication of effort. And then in some cases, there's lack of effort. And we just have to, dollars are precious. We have to find a way to make them go farther and just be more respectful to the taxpayer with them.
Sure, get maximum value out of every dollar that the taxpayers give us. Which brings up 38 Studios. Would you support having an independent investigation?
Yes. I think we need to know what happened. And I'm not so much concerned about the rearview mirror, but I want the forward looking so it doesn't happen again. And we've put certain constraints in place so it doesn't happen again. But I like to look at the past so that we don't make the same mistake again. I differ from some folks that want to have a trial and find out and say that person's guilty. That's fine, but that's not going to get us forward. But I want to use the 38 Studio as an example and as a path to not make it happen again.
Yeah, it's really important that it doesn't happen again because that's, $100 million that we're kind of wasting out there. We are wasting out there.
And what would the economy be like had we apportioned that to many, many little businesses rather than what we ended up doing?
And to me, it speaks to, I just feel, quite frankly, that there was insider deals in there. They may have meant well. They may have really wanted this company to do well. And I'm hoping that that's what their motivation was. But when so many insiders are being favored, then the average folks are paying.
And the average folks don't put all their eggs in one basket. And that's what we did. And the basket broke open and the eggs broke.
And the eggs broke. There's also the issue with our debt that so many of our agencies, our quasis, are able to put out bonds that the taxpayers don't have a right to vote on.
Sure.
And we saw from 38 Studios that even though that was a moral obligation bond, which meant really that it wasn't general obligation, the people didn't give permission, so they shouldn't have had to pay for it, our leaders have said, nope, any bond that goes out, we're on the hook for. So now we have quasi-agencies that are putting out bond after bond after bond. I think they rival what we have, or they're more than we have on our state books. Mm-hmm. That's a real issue. Is there anything you'd like to do about that?
If you look at quasis, and most people aren't aware of who is a quasi, the Airport Corporation,
Narragansett Bay,
Quonset Point,
Bridge and Road, Bridge
without
and
question, the Bridge and Turnpike. I am a little bit of an isolationist. I don't like quasis at all. Sometimes they have a need, but I'd like to rein them all back in and put them under the executive branch.
A little bit more oversight.
There's accountability. In that way, sometimes we need to take the painful look at our debt. And when it's all little numbers here and there, nobody looks at the totality of it. But if everything was under the governor and not independent quasis and everything, I think people would treat it a little differently.
I think they would too. I actually had not thought of that, but it's a nice idea for us to look at because that debt is out there, it's public debt, and it's the average family that's going to pay for it. Whether it's in their water bill or their roads, they're paying for it. And they're ultimately on the hook.
And, basically the governor is the ex officio of every one of those quasis. She can sit on those boards, but nobody really says, well, that's the governor's board. We brought it back into the executive branch. There's accountability. Sure.
The Convention Center Authority, by the way, is one that we missed talking about. A quasi which put out a lot of debt, and the people are going to end up paying $750 million by the time the Convention Center Authority is paid for.
Sure.
you know, I keep looking to the governor to put people on that board that will clean it up, and it doesn't happen. But it is something that the Senate does. You have oversight over appointments, don't you?
That is correct.
So you can ask the hard questions.
And I do ask the hard questions.
All right. And they need to be, because, quite frankly, you know, the Republican Policy Group looked at the Convention Center Authority, and we saw a board that had no accountability to the taxpayers at all. And I worry that that exists in all these other agencies.
In 2007, Governor Kucheri appointed me to the Rhode Island State Properties Committee. And that committee has the oversight on all the leases and sales of property in the state. And I became, how shall I say this nicely, state employees didn't want to come in front of the board because I read every document and I questioned them. And that's what I think I will do in the Senate also.
Wow, that will be really, really valuable. That'll be seriously valuable for them to have up there. They haven't had somebody who wants to critically look at these agencies.
It's needed.
Another reason you should vote for him. And we're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back.
Still less than a year into her term, Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo has decided to take a victory lap by releasing a slickly produced video touting her accomplishments to date, as well as a list of new campaign promise-style goals for the future. And who paid for this self-praise? Ha ha! Are you kidding me? The 90-second infomercial is entitled, "It's Working." Really? The governor starts her voiceover with the undeniable platitude that Rhode Islanders deserve opportunity. She then proceeds to define opportunity as government assistance. I'd argue that Rhode Islanders deserve the right to choose their own opportunities and that the government should stay out of the way as a means to actually facilitate that very expression of freedom. Oh well. The governor proceeds to sum up her approach to streamlining the state's bloated bureaucracy by saying she'll get government moving at the speed of business. I'd argue there are nearly 16,000 state employees and an additional legion of municipal workers who will use mass passive resistance to see that doesn't happen. Plans for efficiency are seen as a threat by those who have comfortable positions, but no actual tasks to perform. By now, some of Ms. Raimondo's supporters are doubtless dismissing this analysis as an attack. How can he claim that the roles of Ocean State employees are bloated, they might ask. At that, I'd argue the state of New Hampshire has a very similar population to that of Rhode Island, and they get along quite nicely on only 7,000 state employees. Oh, and they have 9 times the square area to manage than we do. And no need for a $1 billion bond for roadways, since they already do a far better job paying as they go. Yes, the governor is right. We need more efficient state operations. No, the governor will be unable to achieve that goal because she will not take the political risk necessary to trim union employees and get more work out of those who remain. So, why was this video made? It's not going to be shown on TV, so most Rhode Islanders won't even see it. Why was your tax money and mine used to write and produce this puff piece? Do you think it has anything to do with the sudden increase in public relations personnel who have been hired by the fledgling administration? So, to all that about lean government and moving at the speed of business, I can only reply, are you kidding me?
Welcome back to Common Sense. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and today we have with us John Pagliarini, who is the Senate candidate in District 11, which is on the East Bay, Portsmouth, Tiverton, and Bristol. And I'm really glad to hear that you are against the governor's tolling proposal, John, because this is an issue that is going to come up in January. So when you're sworn in, it's going to be the first thing you have to deal with.
Tolls are ground zero in Portsmouth. I mean, if you talk to anybody in Portsmouth, it's no tolls. It's a story that's coming to a neighborhood near you. This is something that each legislator is going to have to deal with if we find out there's a gantry coming near them.
Well, there's just so many negatives in tolling our economy, but there's other things that affect our economy, and one of those is the cost of electricity. Our energy costs here in Rhode Island are very, very high. You know that last year it was a 24% increase in our electric rates. Now, that hurts us in our homes.
Sure.
Right? I have a lot of folks who are struggling to pay their electric bill. but it also hurts companies because companies actually are larger consumers of electricity. And we are, I did the work on this last year. I think we're the third highest electric rate in the country. I mean, it's really high. It's like only Hawaii maybe is higher than us or something. What would you do about that?
Well, that ranking doesn't surprise me, and you see that is always used against us when companies are moving to South Carolina, North Carolina, because they can provide energy at a less cost. As a land use attorney, I have cited 4 of the largest solar farms in the state of Rhode Island. Recently, we just got approval for a solar farm up in North Smithfield, where we signed a power purchase agreement with the town of North Smithfield to buy all the electricity out of that solar farm. I am pro-solar because I think the difference between solar and wind, say, is that it goes to the rural character of a community. Take the town of Portsmouth. We have a 336-foot turbine that stands idle.
Yeah, I understand it hasn't worked in years.
No, what happened was the town council jumped in, and my opponent was actually one of the leading advocates for that turbine.
Was he the council president at the time?
I believe he was.
So it was his decision to put the wind turbine in. Did he not do his homework?
I'll leave that one unanswered.
Okay.
However, it stands idle, and it's something that just bothers Portsmouth residents because they've been paying the debt load on that. And now they're faced with, what do we do with it? And they recently passed an ordinance or approved a contract to take it down and put another one up with a different company.
Oh my God, you're scrapping the whole thing? You can't fix it?
That one cannot be fixed because the company that built it went out of business. So what they're doing is they're going to have a contractor come in, take it down, and build a new one.
Oh, what a waste of money.
Well, it's something that not every resident in the town of Portsmouth supports. But, they've been paying the debt load on it.
Well, I have a problem with renewables, not because I don't like having the idea of, cleaning up our environment, but because they're so expensive. Wind is actually 3 to 4 times more expensive than conventional sources of electricity, natural gas. And for me, that's a real issue because even though the wind is free, the windmills are not. Do you know how much they're paying for these? What did they pay for the old windmill?
The turbine in Portsmouth?
The one that has never worked.
I want to say it was between $3 and $4 million at the time, and they cost more now to put them up. And it depends on how many megawatts they put out and the height and all the factors that are involved. I advocate for solar because solar is passive. It's not obtuse. You can drive by it and not see it. We site a lot of them in hollows so that it can't be seen. And we're putting large solar farms up. We're talking 5 or 10 acres of panels, 10,000 solar panels. And it just fits better. And where we can go, and I say we, but the solar folks go, is on farms. Because farmers have a lot of land and they're in danger due to taxation and other pressures of government of losing those farms. How do we generate additional income? Solar farms work great on a lot of farms, but yet we don't want to see 400-foot turbines popping up everywhere.
No, they kill birds too, which is something that bothers me. I'm sorry, it does. But the biggest problem for me is that those high energy costs hurt our residents, hurt our small businesses. They're just really, really bad to keep raising our electric rates at such huge gulps. I mean, 2 years ago it was 12%, last year 24, 27%, something like that. I worry now we have mild weather, but what if it gets worse?
And it's all the cumulative effect because, as you're stating, businesses faced with those electrical costs, and they're faced with things like the minimum $500 tax on their small business, and everything else that's putting the pressure on. Again, I keep saying to my voters, we need to get out of the way of small business, and anything we can do to help with electric costs, I think, helps us get out of their way.
It helps us get out of their way, absolutely. When you are elected, how do you like that?
I like that.
When you are elected, do you have any particular initiatives that you want to take on? The Republicans 2 years ago, we proposed to eliminate the income tax, state income tax on Social Security. And it was done last year. But another thing that we did at that time was to eliminate the tax on military pensions. I know you have a lot of military folks over in Portsmouth. We'd like to keep them here in Rhode Island because they're really good citizens and it's a way to honor them. Massachusetts actually doesn't have income tax on military pensions.
And that's a huge problem in my district because we are so close to the Navy base. So yes, I do support the elimination, and I will champion the elimination of income taxation on military pensions. The cost this year would be $8 million. However, if you look at what is the multiplier effect of losing those high income retirees from the military, these are the folks that shop at Clements Market in Portsmouth. These are the folks that are spending their money, and if they go over to Massachusetts,
and they are going over to Massachusetts,
and whom are we going to replace them with? It's not going to be persons of the same income bracket. So, I do support and would push.
It's not only their buying, which obviously gives the state revenue. We get income tax from them. We don't want to.
We don't want to. But it also is.
But it's their expertise. These are professionals. They have been trained in a lot of different specialties, and we'd like to keep that here.
Oh, and it also what the big distinction with the military veterans is they served our country. I served in the National Guard, and I was there for 6 years. And there's a difference. If somebody's been in the military for 20 years, we need to say thank you. And I think this is a small way our state can be saying thank you to keep them here in the state with their grandchildren.
Absolutely. So anything else you want to tell your voters before we wrap up here?
Absolutely. I thank you for your time, and please do come out and vote on January 5th. We need your help.
We need your help. So when you're at your Christmas parties, you talk about John. Make sure voters get to the polls on Tuesday, January 5th, and also talk about the tolling proposal. And let's get it stopped.
Thank you.
I was wondering how the changes in American society may be affecting that venerable national holiday called Christmas. Now, the Gallup folks say that 95% of Americans celebrate Christmas, even though they may not go to church. But some 93% of us exchange gifts, 93% get together with family and friends, 88% of us put up Christmas trees, 62% go to the Christmas Eve parties, 65% decorate with a religious meaning, like a nativity scene. Well, when you separate the percentage with strongly religious beliefs, the numbers actually go very much higher. Christmas as a national holiday first started in Alabama in 1836. Then in Louisiana and Arkansas in 1838. Now, why the southern states, you ask? Because many northerners saw sin in the celebration of Christmas. Now it is a day off everywhere in America. So how did we get to where we are at Christmas time? Well, when the Puritans arrived in New England, they made it illegal to mention St. Nicholas's name. You couldn't exchange gifts, light a candle, or sing Christmas carols. Then the Dutch arrived, and they brought the legend of Sinterklaas to their adopted country. Then in 1773, Santa first appeared in the media as Saint A. Claus. Now in 1804, the New York Historical Society was founded with St. Nicholas as its patron saint. The members engaged in the Dutch practice of gift giving at Christmas. And so the Christmas history goes. All over the country, the traditions of many different nationalities that make up America are acted out during what many Americans call their national holiday. And so do many other countries. Christmas is a national holiday all over the world. There are a few places where it isn't. China, for instance. After all, communism tried to get rid of God. But if you were looking down from Santa's sled, you would see that much of the world is all about Christmas. Here we have Christmas trees, the hanging of Advent wreaths, Christmas stockings, candy canes, nativity sets, and singing of Christmas carols, sending of Christmas cards, midnight services, family gathering to exchange presents or hold one of those mysterious Yankee swaps. Love those. What is abundantly clear to all of us is that we have made the Christmas season a big deal. The celebration of the birth of Christ is a bit overwhelmed by the commercialization of gift giving, but without the Christian background, there would be no Christmas. Now, I loved Christmas in Worcester when I grew up. It was a time of anticipation at the very early age. At a very, very early age, I knew for sure that Santa would make it down the chimney. We actually had one. And he would give me exactly what I asked for that day. I sat on his lap in Denholm's department store with my list. Then a little later in life, I got to the adult side of Christmas to do all the things that seemed to make everyone a little happier while they were shoveling piles of snow. Now, the 50s was a very snowy decade. I remember delivering the Worcester Telegram all week at 5 in the morning, walking through 4 feet of snow. Snow on the roads all winter. Now, this December, I am golfing. So far. Who knows? Must be climate change. So what have you been up to at your home? Is the tree up, the outside decorated, the office party planned, and what about all the gifts you need to buy? Well, in my house, I am occasionally consulted by my shopping certified spouse as to the appropriateness of various gift purchases. Mostly, I track the debt accumulation. Now, over the years, we have accumulated enough Christmas decorations to fill several totes. These containers sit in the attic until after Thanksgiving when I get out the stepladder, open up the hatch to gaze lovingly at the entire attic, mostly filled with Christmas stuff. I am only allowed to get them down from the attic and watch the boss decorate the house. I do get to set up the artificial Christmas tree, but that's basically it for me until the totes are empty and they all go back up the stairs and then back in the attic until the 12 days of Christmas are over, when they come down again to be refilled. But I will say that it is increasingly difficult to manage all the weight of these bulky totes. Most folks my age have moved to condos or have helped to do the heavy lifting. It remains to be seen how much longer the annual trip to the attic will survive. One of the facts of life when you have lots of grandkids hanging around at Christmas time is the need for entertainment. So over time, we have accumulated, love that word, lots of things that make sounds. I'd like to give you a demo of some of the critters that roam around our Christmas tree. And you will have to imagine how much fun it is every year to fill these lovely toys with batteries. Now here is a random selection of my favorite annoyances. This one, I can't show you completely, we're on the table. This one walks all over the house. Oh, with dogs and kids chasing it. It's really good. This one demonstrates my lack of knowing where the on button is. So I'll have to, here it is.
Jingle bells, jingle bells.
You know that song. Very famous song. Now, while that is being played, we can go over here to Goofy. Goofy does two things. He does that one, and then apparently he does this one too. He flies. Okay, thank you, sir. Enough of you. And this is one of my absolute favorites. This is really a dog that is dressed up as a reindeer.
Jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle.
How can you resist that? You know?
Oh,
That's a good one. And then, of course, that very famous person we've been talking about. This is the one that my latest grandson loves to dance to. Let's see if this button will actually make it work. Here we are. Pay attention. All right, I'm going to hold off for just a second, and you can see that you get both sides of Santa. The little guy loves to mimic that. Then, of course, my wife, who likes to have hippopotamuses, she got me this. All Christmas long, we get to the hippopotamus song. And then when I go out the door to go to a Christmas party, I get the benefit of this. Always the hit of the party. Batteries are very expensive. Do you know that? Well, I hope you have enjoyed this concert. I'm going to turn all of these on. No, I won't. Thank you for watching, and God bless.